General Hospital will reveal exciting details on Thursday, May 22, 2025. First, the Nurses' Ball, an annual celebration meant to honor the selfless contributions of Port Charles's medical staff, quickly unraveled into chaos when Jason received a chilling phone call backstage. The voice on the other end belonged to an unidentified man who issued a terrifying threat. A bomb had been planted somewhere at the venue, and it would detonate before the night was over. Jason, usually composed under pressure, was visibly shaken. As he returned to the main hall, scanning the crowd with urgency, he knew he had mere minutes to act. The once elegant ballroom, filled with music, laughter, and shimmering gowns, was about to descend into utter pandemonium. As whispers of the threat spread, panic overtook the guests like a wave crashing onto a fragile shore. The music cut abruptly, lights flickered, and terrified murmurs escalated into full-blown screams. Guests began scrambling toward the exits, knocking over chairs and trampling decorations in a desperate bid to escape. Carly frantically searched the room for her children, while Willow clutched Donna tightly to her chest. Sonny, despite his recent heart surgery, stepped in to regain control, summoning trusted allies to help maintain order. Meanwhile, Anna issued an emergency lockdown command, and Dante raced to access security footage to identify potential suspects. Behind the scenes, fear gripped everyone. Lucy, the ball's usual energetic host, was paralyzed with dread, hiding behind the stage curtains. Sasha, still fragile from her past trauma, was knocked to the ground in the stampede until Cody heroically rushed back to help her up. Ava screamed Avery's name over the din, realizing with mounting horror that her daughter was missing. In another corner, the Quartermains and Ashfords huddled together, trying to stay calm and protect their loved ones. Officers arrived. But without knowing the exact location or validity of the threat, they could do little but search and pray. Unbeknownst to all, a small blinking device had been carefully tucked beneath the main podium, its countdown timer flashing with each second that passed. The threat was real. As confusion reigned and escape routes clogged with frightened guests, Jason remained focused, determined to find the device before it was too late. In that moment, the Nurses' Ball, once a symbol of healing, unity, and celebration, had become a battleground between life and death, forcing heroes to rise under the weight of terror while Port Charles held its collective breath. Second, Drew was brimming with confidence, a rare lightness in his stride that hadn't been seen in months. His plan to expose Portia was moving along exactly as intended, every piece falling into place like a game of chess he had already mastered. To those watching, his enthusiasm bordered on arrogance, a dangerous sense of control that often precedes a devastating fall. And indeed, there were whispers, silent hopes from those who had long grown tired of Drew's self-righteous crusade, that perhaps his impending triumph would turn into poetic justice. But Drew couldn't see the cliff edge he was walking toward, not with the adrenaline of imminent victory clouding his judgment. He had gone to great lengths to gather evidence against Portia, weaving together a narrative of deceit, manipulation, and betrayal. From secret financial records to private conversations she believed were off the record. Drew believed he had built an airtight case that would not only destroy Portia's credibility but would also reclaim his own power in Port Charles. Every meeting, every strategic leak to the press, every calculated move had been orchestrated in the shadows, and he was convinced that when the moment came, Portia would have no defense. But fate had other plans. In an unexpected twist, Willow stumbled upon a folder Drew had left unsecured, a folder containing detailed transcripts, photographs, and timelines that painted Portia as the architect of a devastating cover-up. At first, Willow was confused, unsure of what she was looking at. But as she pieced together the context and recognized her own name among the notes, horror began to settle in. Drew had not only been digging into Portia's actions but had also crossed personal boundaries that made Willow question everything, including her trust in him. The discovery left Willow reeling. She felt betrayed, used, and complicit in a scheme she never agreed to be part of. Her loyalty, already strained by recent events, was now hanging by a thread. As Drew continued to celebrate what he thought was a soon-to-be victory, he remained blissfully unaware that the one person who could destroy his entire plan had just uncovered the truth. And in that silent moment of realization, Willow became the ticking time bomb in a game Drew thought he was winning. Third. Two worlds that Jocelyn had fought desperately to keep separate were now hurtling toward a catastrophic collision. On one side was Carly, the fiercely protective mother who had built her life around instincts and intuition. On the other, Vaughn, a shadowy figure from Jocelyn's new life, one who embodied the danger, secrecy, and purpose she had found since joining WSB. When Carly and Vaughn finally came face to face, the tension was immediate, electric, and unmistakable. Carly didn't need a background check to feel something was off. The way Vaughn watched the room, the carefully measured way he spoke, the slight smirk that never reached his eyes, it all screamed danger. And Carly, no stranger to darkness herself, recognized the signs instantly. Jocelyn, caught in the crossfire, could feel the heat rising long before a word was exchanged. The moment Carly began to probe with subtle questions, Jocelyn panicked. She spun a lie with practiced calm, claiming Vaughn was just an academic contact from a school project, nothing more. She laughed off Carly's questions and quickly redirected the conversation. But the spark of suspicion in Carly's eyes only grew brighter. It wasn't just the presence of a mysterious man, it was the way Jocelyn's entire body language changed around him. The way she avoided eye contact, the way her answers came too quickly, too polished. The lie cracked before it could solidify. Carly, relentless and sharp, pushed harder, demanding to know what Jocelyn was hiding. Her voice rose, filled with frustration and fear, accusing Jocelyn of putting herself in danger and betraying the family's trust. Jocelyn, overwhelmed and defensive, fired back with just as much heat, insisting she was an adult now, capable of making her own choices, of fighting battles Carly couldn't even begin to understand. What started as a confrontation quickly spiraled into a full-blown war, a battle of wills between a mother terrified of losing her daughter to something she couldn't control, and a daughter desperate to protect the very secrets that now threatened to consume them both. By the time Vaughn calmly excused himself, the room had already erupted in emotional debris. Carly stood breathless, eyes burning with disbelief, while Jocelyn trembled with rage and heartbreak, knowing that her carefully constructed dual life had officially crumbled. The war had begun, not just between mother and daughter, but between past and future, trust and deception, and the safety of family versus the perilous allure of purpose in a dangerous world. And in the silence that followed, only one truth remained: nothing would ever be the same again. Fourth, Ned and Olivia presented a united front, their expressions stern and voices measured as they delivered a firm warning. Despite recent tensions within the Quartermain family, this was one issue they agreed upon completely: Lulu had crossed a line. They had both observed with growing concern how Lulu had become increasingly involved in Brooke Lynn's personal affairs, particularly after the revelation of her pregnancy. What began as curiosity or concern had escalated into unwelcome interference, and now, with Lulu attempting to insert herself into decisions regarding the baby's future, Ned and Olivia decided it was time to act. They approached Lulu not as adversaries but as parents who understood the emotional weight of parenthood and the need for boundaries. Yet their message was clear: Brooke Lynn deserved space, privacy, and the dignity to make her own choices without outside influence. Their warning wasn't a threat, it was a line drawn in defense of their daughter's autonomy. Both knew Lulu's intentions might not be malicious, but the consequences of her persistence were becoming disruptive. Olivia, in particular, had grown protective after seeing how Brooke Lynn's stress levels rose with every encounter, while Ned viewed Lulu's behavior as a betrayal of family trust. But Lulu, driven by her own unresolved traumas and ideals about motherhood, refused to back down. She believed she was helping Brooke Lynn see the bigger picture. Perhaps even trying to prevent mistakes she herself once made. The more she was warned to step away, the more determined she became to stay involved. Her actions, though cloaked in concern, became invasive, offering unsolicited advice, showing up uninvited, even speaking on Brooke Lynn's behalf to others in the family. What Lulu saw as compassion, others began to view as control. As tensions mounted, Brooke Lynn found herself torn between gratitude and resentment. While a part of her understood Lulu's emotional investment, another part felt suffocated by her relentless involvement. And despite Ned and Olivia's efforts to de-escalate the situation, it became clear that the storm was only beginning. Lulu's refusal to step aside wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was the beginning of a deeper conflict that could fracture not just friendships, but the entire fabric of the Quartermaine legacy. Finally, Curtis sat alone in the dim light of his office, the shadows around him stretching long and quiet, mirroring the depth of the storm churning inside him. 4 weeks now. He had been watching Drew from a distance, piecing together a pattern of behavior that no longer felt coincidental. Drew had changed, no longer the trustworthy ally he once appeared to be, but a calculating force carving through Port Charles with unchecked ambition. Curtis knew the signs. He had seen this kind of transformation before in men who believed their good intentions justified everything. But good intentions didn't erase deception. And Curtis was done watching Drew manipulate everyone around him. The shift in Curtis's thinking hadn't happened overnight. It had come slowly, almost reluctantly. As he began connecting Drew's recent decisions to the instability brewing in the lives of those closest to them. There were whispers of backroom dealings, strange disappearances of key information, and a growing list of people who had suddenly fallen out of favor, most of whom had dared to challenge Drew's authority. Curtis had ignored the red flags at first, telling himself he was being paranoid. But now, with the evidence mounting, he couldn't ignore what was right in front of him. Drew was becoming a problem. One that needed to be handled before the consequences became irreversible. Curtis wasn't one to act rashly, and he certainly wasn't driven by vengeance. He approached this the same way he had once approached intelligence work, with patience, strategy, and an unshakable sense of purpose. He began quietly assembling a network of trusted contacts. Some from his past, others forged in the complex web of Port Charles politics. These were people who understood discretion and loyalty. Every conversation he had was calculated. Every question carefully worded, each breadcrumb placed to lead him toward the truth. If Drew was hiding something, and Curtis was now certain he was, then it would only be a matter of time before the facade cracked. The more Curtis dug, the more disturbed he became. He uncovered shell companies tied to Drew's name, secret transactions that led to offshore accounts, and confidential memos that contradicted the public image Drew worked so hard to project. It was a web of shadows, cleverly constructed, but not impenetrable. Curtis knew how to dismantle illusions. What disturbed him most wasn't just the corruption, it was the realization that Drew had likely started down this path long before anyone suspected. His manipulation was sophisticated. His narrative airtight. He wasn't just playing a role, he believed it. And that made him dangerous. Curtis began preparing for the moment of confrontation, knowing it would have to be surgical. If he went too hard, too fast, he could alienate allies and allow Drew to twist the truth before Curtis could fully expose it. Timing was everything. He would need leverage, something undeniable. Something that would turn the tide of public opinion instantly. And he was close. There were still a few pieces missing, a few calls to make, but the endgame was in sight. The Curtis who once worked in the shadows now stood ready to shine a light on the man who had betrayed far too many for far too long. As he finalized his plans, Curtis couldn't help but think about the fallout. He knew this would affect people he cared about, especially those who still saw Drew as a hero. There would be backlash, disappointment. Maybe even anger directed at him. But Curtis had made peace with that. He wasn't doing this for approval. He was doing this because someone had to. He had watched too many good people suffer because of lies dressed up as leadership, and he refused to let that happen again. If Drew wanted to play a high-stakes game, then he would finally face someone who knew how to fight in the dark without losing himself to it. Curtis looked out the window one last time, the lights of Port Charles twinkling beneath a heavy sky. The city had seen its share of battles, but this one would be different. It wouldn't be fought with fists or threats, but with truth, sharp, strategic, and devastating. And when it was over, whether he stood victorious or alone, Curtis knew one thing for certain: he would no longer stand by and let power go unchecked. Drew had made his move. Now it was Curtis's turn.